Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to this gathering. We're so glad to see your faces in this Zoom room. My name is Alan Ewing Merrill, and I serve as Executive Director of the BTS Center, the organizational successor to Bangor Theological Seminary. Today, a private operating foundation focusing on spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world. On behalf of the BTS Center and the Maine Council of Churches, co-hosts for this event, I want to welcome you. We're so glad to be collaborating with one another and with our moderator, the Reverend Dr. Marvin Ellison, to bring this event to you today. We're especially honored to have with us renowned author and theologian, Reverend Dr. Carter Heyward, who will be discussing her new book, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, a call to action, which is hot off the press. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge that we are logging in today from places on land long stewarded by Indigenous people. As I log in today from Portland, Maine, I acknowledge that I receive sustenance from the stolen lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the people of the Dawnland, the Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes. If you know the name of the Indigenous people whose land you now occupy, I invite you in just a moment of silence to name them and to acknowledge the ways in which repeated and ongoing violations of sovereignty, of territory and water are one expression of white Christian nationalism. To acknowledge that these violations have caused unspeakable suffering and ongoing trauma. My prayer is that those of us with power and privilege might commit ourselves to the work of challenging and ending systems of racism and colonialism that are designed to exploit and oppress others. That our lives and our ministries may be guided by a deepening posture of humility, confession, and repentance, and that we might seek to be in right relationship with those whom we have harmed. Jane.
Thanks, Alan. And hello, everyone. I am Jane Field, the Executive Director of the Maine Council of Churches, and we're an ecumenical coalition of 7 denominations who, together with our associate members, have 437 congregations with 55,000 members through our state. Our mission is to inspire and equip people within, through, and beyond the church to unite in building a culture of justice, compassion, and peace. I'd like to take a moment now to offer some words of thanks. First, to the team of our staff who have worked so hard to pull this together. Kay, Ash, Nicole, and Megan. This wouldn't have happened without you, and we're grateful for your work. We're also grateful to our event partners whose logos you see on your screen now. The Haney Layton Fund, First Congregational Church of South Portland, the Social Action Committee of the Maine Conference United Church of Christ, St. Albans Episcopal Church of Cape Elizabeth, Hope Gateway, the Maine Conference of the New England Synod, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, St. Luke's Cathedral, and the Episcopal Diocese of Maine. And speaking of the Episcopal Diocese of Maine, it is now my great honor and privilege to introduce their 10th and current bishop, the Right Reverend Thomas Brown, who has been a faithful and cherished colleague and brother in faith since he arrived in Maine in 2019. Bishop Brown, would you offer us some words of greeting?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. I bring you greetings from the people of God, called to be the Episcopal Church in Maine. I am honored and delighted to be with all of you and to welcome you to Maine on behalf of including the co-sponsors and all of us who live in Maine and get to welcome you from time to time to our beautiful state. I am honored to join them in saying to you, we are glad that you're here. One of the great things about Dr. Heyward is that she doesn't really need introduction. Marvin is going to do that in a moment, but I'm just going to make a brief connection, an important connection about her role in changing our church. As we come toward the 50th anniversary of Carter and those other 10 women who were ordained, one of whom also lives in Maine. Meryl Bittner lives here too. We do so, I do so deeply, deeply grateful for their courage, for their continued commitment to teaching us and to inviting us also to be teachers. We paddle in the wake of many women, but in this particular branch of the Christian tree, and particularly in Maine, we continue to mark and remember the anniversary of those ordinations in Philadelphia that changed our church then and continue to change our church today. It's not too much to say that we paddle in the wake of women and a few men who had some courage, but let's be clear, it was a movement of women, of clarity, of commitment, and of a regard for the future that we could sure use in these days. And so we take our cue, not only from Carter, but from every other person who will say to us that whatever there was in the past, there is a bright and glorious future for us all. I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to learning once again from our great teacher and friend, Carter. Jane, I think you're going to give us a roadmap.
Thank you so much, Bishop Brown. And you're right, before I introduce our moderator, let me give you all a roadmap and some directions for our time together this afternoon. Today's presentation will be in the form of a conversation between friends, the Reverend Doctors Marvin Ellison and Carter Heyward. We'll all get a chance to eavesdrop as they talk about Carter's new book, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism. As one of our colleagues said, only 7? Starting at about 4:45, we'll open the chat function for you in the audience to post any questions you might like us to ask of Marvin and Carter. I'll have the opportunity to ask them on your behalf before we end the program. And just before the end, we will provide you with some more information about an optional follow-up opportunity for book groups to meet with Carter again in February. So now that we know where we're going, let me introduce our esteemed driver, Reverend Dr. Marvin Ellison. Marvin is a native of Tennessee and an ordained Presbyterian minister. He taught Christian social ethics at Bangor Theological Seminary for 32 years, and then, after the seminary closed, he worked as Director of Alumni Relations for Union Theological Seminary in New York City, my alma mater. He founded the Religious Coalition Against Discrimination. That's an interfaith network of faith leaders in Maine who support civil rights protections for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people, including the freedom to marry. He also founded the Maine Interfaith Council for Reproductive Choices and has organized a volunteer chaplaincy for Planned Parenthood. An author and an educator for justice, his most recent book is Making Love Just: Sexual Ethics for Perplexing Times, published by Fortress Press. He currently serves on the boards of the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence, the Haney-Layton Fund, and Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, and their Action Fund. He also co-hosts a radio show called Queer Spirit on Outcast Radio on WMPG and WERU. That's a forum about queer lives and the power of the sacred. He lives in Portland with his husband, Frank Brooks, and we are delighted to have him with us today. Marvin, it's your turn to take the steering wheel, my friend.
Thanks so much, Jane. What a delight to be asked to introduce my friend and colleague and to give an introduction that's totally unnecessary, but I will do it anyway. So Carter Heyward, as we all know, is an educator and widely published author, an Episcopal priest, liberation theologian, and justice advocate who taught for more than 30 years at the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge. She now lives in retirement in Western North Carolina, but has kept strong connections with Maine after spending many summers on Deer Isle. As a priest and teacher, Carter has spent her life energy working on the borders of church and society with groups representing different identities, ideologies, and justice concerns. Among her many publications include such titles as The Redemption of God, A Theology of Mutual Relation, Our Passion for Justice, Saving Jesus from Those Who Are Right, and She Flies On, a white Southern Christian debutante wakes up. Carter's most recent book, the occasion for today's conversation, has just been released by Littlefield and Rowan and is entitled, as you know, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, A Call to Action. Of all her publications in her long and distinguished career, Carter describes this book as her most consequential. So Carter, thank you so much for being here. And I'm really delighted that Maine is the site of your book launch. Let's hope that as Maine goes, so goes the nation.
Amen.
Amen. So why don't we just plunge right in? And let me start off, Carter, and by asking why this book and why now? I mean, if I have it right, you decided to do this book after you watched the January 6th insurrection unfold on television and witnessed this mob carrying both Confederate and Christian flags into the US Capitol. So tell us what you understand to be this white Christian nationalist movement, and why do you find it so alarming, so dangerous?
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you, everybody. Matter of fact, I will try to answer those questions as best I can, but I do want to thank a few people myself first for putting me right here where I am in this Zoom room, inviting me to be here. Let me say, as Alan suggested, we say to at least ourselves that I am sitting here on the land, the sacred land of the Cherokee peoples in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And I think a lot about that as I absorb the energy from the land and the people and what has happened. I want to thank Marvin, of course, for really beginning to arrange this with Jane and others of you. Some months ago, Marvin is a most beloved colleague and friend of many, many years, and he happens also to be a cousin by marriage, literally, which is quite wonderful. I never stopped learning from Marvin. Thanks also to Alan and to Jane and to Bishop Thomas, whom I've only today met, but have heard so much about, and to everyone else, to Kay and Nicole and Ash and Megan and everyone who's helped make this possible, and to all of you out there for showing up and lending your ears and your hearts and your corporate wisdom to this gathering and to what I hope can be something of a conversation today that we can all learn from. And then I also want to name very briefly the people, the 3 women who began this project with me, and that will take me to how it all began here in North Carolina. After watching the insurrection at the Capitol in great shock, as I'm sure was true for all of you, on January the 6th, my friends Ann Gilson and Susan Leffler and Darlene Odell, whom some of you know, I'm sure, all of them gifted writers themselves, all of them feminists and theologians with a strong passion for justice. And I began talking about the fact that somebody needed to do something. It's like, what do we do? This could be a question that everyone on this Zoom meeting has asked. What on earth do we do? And this book grew out of conversations among the four of us and many others right here in the hills of Western North Carolina as we struggled with what our particular calls or charges might be in this historical moment. This led eventually to my writing of this particular book, and then to the assistance that I got from my most dear colleague from Episcopal Divinity School, Kwak Puilan, herself a remarkable theologian, and the editors at Rowan and Littlefield that she led me to, including Natalie Manziuk and later Richard Brown, who helped shepherd this project along. Without all of these people, the people on the screen and these people that I have named, I would not be sitting here talking to you today. And so, thank you for being here. And I'm aware that I know a good many of you who are out there, and I wish I could see your faces, but I can in my mind's eye. And I know that somehow all of us, whether I know you personally or not, we are connected. And that's, of course, what this book is about. White Christian nationalism. Let me read to you first the definition that is given in the wonderful book by Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, two sociologists who published a book in 2020 called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civic life and includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, along with divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. More succinctly, I would say that white Christian nationalism tells us that America is meant by its founders and by God, and of course this is key, to be a nation led by, shaped by, and accountable to conservative white Christian men, period. White Christian nationalism. We see this today. Any number of commentators have pointed out an example of white Christian nationalism in the failure of the United States Senate to enact voting rights legislation. I mean, how can this be a democracy in which we do not have voting rights for the citizens of this nation? Listen to the words of white Christian nationalist Paul Weyrich in 1980. Weyrich was both a proud Christian nationalist and a Republican strategist. And he said at a meeting of evangelicals in Dallas, Texas, "I don't want everyone to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage," he says, our leverage being the Republican Party's leverage, in elections goes up as the voting population goes down. Think about that. I mean, this was a proud statement. This was made right out in public. Our leverage goes up as voting goes down. And we're living right in the middle of that, my friends, right in the middle of that phenomenon, white Christian nationalism. Just a few more words about white Christian nationalism before we go on to the next question, Marvin. I was thinking this morning as I was making notes to myself about this, I was thinking about Jesus's words, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And I think it's fair to say that white Christian nationalists would say, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and also what is God's." Because white Christian nationalists put Caesar, or the secular power of their time, their place, our time and place, above God. White Christian nationalism flips upside down our senses of both spiritual and national allegiance. Christians traditionally and pretty much universally have believed that God, by whatever names we call her or him or it or them, spirit, higher power, Jesus, Christic power, however we image God, is or should be our ultimate authority. White Christian nationalists have taken this most sacred of our assumptions and turned it upside down so that our ultimate authority is white male Christian supremacy. Everyone and everything else, including our experiences of and understandings of God, goddess, spirit, goodness, love, compassion, and justice, become subject to and are accountable to white male Christian supremacy. I saw a sign not too long ago that said, "Trump is my king, Jesus is my Lord." Well, figure that out. What does that actually mean? White Christian nationalism. And it is alarming. And I have to say that when I began writing this book and talking about it with my friends, I was very alarmed. And the more I thought about it and the more research I did on it, the more alarmed I became. But I have become increasingly more alarmed by the day and by the week and by the month leading up to right where we are now. We are in a very, very dangerous moment in American history, my friends. And I think those of us who are Christians need to understand that we are too, as Christians, as people who believe in a God of justice, love, by whatever names. We are in a very precarious moment. And that is what this book is about.
Thank you, Carter. You know, this is a perfect segue because I wanted to ask you just to say a little bit about yourself as the author of this book and also about your intended audience, because in the book you write, Christianity is my tradition, and the Jesus story continues to feed my soul, you say. So you identify as Christian, but a Christian with qualification. You describe yourself as a particular kind of Christian, as a universalist Christian. So talk a little bit about what you mean by that qualification, and then say a bit about who you're writing this book for.
Thanks for those good questions, dear friend. Yes, I'm Christian to the tip of my toes, in that I really do cherish Jesus as a brother, as a friend, as someone who walks and talks with me. And I don't mean that in really a very literal way, but I do mean that in a thoroughly sort of immersive way, in the spirit of that brother from Nazareth and what we see in him and learn in him, those of us who are Christian. And I've been that since I was a child. Though I've not always been an Episcopalian, I have been an Episcopalian since I was 2. And my parents were Presbyterian and Methodist, and they went to an Episcopal church when we moved to Hendersonville, North Carolina. And they told me later they went there because they liked the ivy on the church. So that's how I became an Episcopalian. And particularly as a teenager, I spent all of my time, it seems to me, in the church when I wasn't in my school. Loved the church. My relationship to the organized religion has become less one of, it's become more uneasy. It's less easy than it once was, because I understand, as I have aged and learned more as a priest, as well as a regular human being, I have learned more and more about some of the problems we have as Christians, and that's what this book is also about. And I wrestle with those issues, and we'll be talking about some of them as we go along today. So I'm an uneasy Christian. I don't always, or even sometimes often, like what the church stands for in our society. Though when it does stand for justice, and when it struggles for justice and speaks for justice, I am proud to my toes to be Christian. I call myself a universalist Christian because I believe that's most in keeping with Jesus of Nazareth's understanding and experience of God. This was a spirit of not any sort of one particular tradition necessarily, although in Jesus's case, of course, it was Judaism, but not necessarily Judaism and not necessarily Christianity, but a God of all creation, a God of all who don't recognize God, a life force, a moral grounding, a root of all that is. Universalism. That's what I mean by that. And I believe Jesus was a universalist. And I try to walk and talk and listen to this brother Jesus as I go along through life and get older. Oh, so who is this audience, you ask? The audience is primarily other Christians, probably mainly white Christians, because these problems are so intrinsic in many ways to being white Americans, including being white Christians. And I would really like very much for sister and brother and sibling white Christians to really wrestle with the questions that this book raises about what we're doing and what we think we're doing, who or what we believe in, how our differences might be able to strengthen us rather than weaken our faith, for example, how people don't have to agree with me about Jesus or about God to be on the same page morally in terms of what kind of a society we really are struggling for and want. One of the things I say from the very beginning of this book, even though I'm a very liberal American and a very liberal Christian, some would say radical in both cases. I think that's too much of a compliment to me. I think I'm just a plain old liberal Christian and a liberal American. But you don't have to agree with me to read this book, to argue with this book, to argue with each other in a spirit of mutuality. That is to say, and what can you give? What can you take? What can we learn from one another? None of us have ever got it all right. And this book is an invitation to other Christians who would probably place themselves somewhere in sort of the center or the middle of Christianity, both in terms of their theologies and maybe their politics, to the left. I don't expect to get too many really, really conservative readers from either the political world or the Christian world, though I would welcome that if and when and how that happens, as long as we can meet each other in a spirit of mutuality and try to learn and teach together.
Thanks, Carter. So let's talk a little bit about what people are going to discuss and debate about in your book, because you take on some really big issues in a relatively small book. So, for example, in the book, you show how Christian evangelicalism has fused with state power to promote Christian exceptionalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia and transphobia, and an unfettered gun culture. You also address, I think, very importantly, how white Christian nationalism has encouraged this rapacious capitalist spirituality of extraction and exploitation. And so you underscore how Christianity is deeply implicated in the ecological degradation of our planet. So rightly, you call all of this a toxic brew. But what I'm also curious about is, given the title of the book, you also want to name all of this as sin. What's sin got to do with it?
Well, yes, I do discuss this in the book at some length because I'm aware that sin, I actually like the concept of God. Sin as a concept turns off a lot of people. Some of the first criticisms I've gotten in this book have been from people who think that even the title is too religious, not just sin, but Christian. I mean, having anything religious in a title right now does not do it for some of our sisters and brothers. And simply being a Christian makes me part of the problem. And I will admit that's true. That's what I'm asking us to look at here. Look at how we as Christians play into the problems we are critiquing. Sin, sort of traditionally, and I would take this from a fairly traditional perspective, sin is whatever separates us from God. It's an impediment, it's a stumbling block. It's the things we trip over as we move along our way in life. But whether we call it sin or whether we call it simply a systemic problem, that's what I mean when I say sin. This is not primarily about our personal failures as it is about our systemic failures as a society. White supremacy is a very good example of a huge and major sin in our midst. Sin leads to evil, to lynching, to discrimination, to the denial of voting rights, these concrete things that hurt, wound, kill people. That's evil. The sin is the attitude and that gets us there. And it runs contrary to my understanding of God as the source of justice, love among us. Does that answer your question, Marvin, or do you want me to go further?
Well, I know you can go further, but I want to ask a couple other questions. So I'm going to move us on as much as I'd like to stay right here. You know, as an ethicist, I wouldn't have ever had a job if it wasn't for sin. I mean, sin abounds. And so it's given us a lot of us a lot of time over our many years to struggle and work. You know, one of the things I also want to say, Carter, is I appreciate about your book is that it's really strong on analyzing what's gone wrong, what the problem is, but you do much more. You move on to say, now what do we do? And so the subtitle of your book, I think, is as important as the title, a call to action. And you write, we must learn to stand together and be strategic in doing so. For most of us, this means supporting a political party that can win, not casting protest votes, much less sitting out upcoming elections. So Carter, in calling us to action, how do you see us effectively resisting and disrupting the movement toward authoritarianism?
Okay, at one level, there's a simple answer to that, and that is vote for those whose commitments and lives reflect your values of justice, love, of inclusivity, of fairness, of compassion, and vote for those whose values you really want to uphold and want to uphold yours. In the churches, which is where the rubber hits the road here, because churches have been so silent on so much of this, the churches that most of us belong to, not so much the national bodies where leadership, for example, I will say in the Episcopal Church, Thomas Brown and many, many others, leaders are very clear, outspoken advocates of justice, but so often parish pastors, priests, ministers, and leaders don't feel like they can say anything for fear of alienating and hurting and driving away those in their congregations who need to be there, they believe, but who will not come back if they feel afraid or alienated or like they're being humiliated in some way. And that is a huge pastoral challenge for parish priests and pastors and ministers. That's why in the call to action of this book, I have listed questions at the end of each chapter that I believe parish pastors, educational leaders, priests, bishops, and others could really invite people to wrestle with in their churches. And that would allow people to begin to hear one another. Famous feminist theologian Nell Morton talked about hearing one another to speech. How can churches help their own congregates hear one another to speech and begin to speak of hard things? Abortion is a wonderful example. How can parishes, understanding that in most parishes, even liberal parishes, there will be an array of opinion about abortion. Many of us are passionately pro-choice, as I have been all of my life, even though I have some personal misgivings about what I would have done as a younger woman had I had to make that choice. But in terms of legal accessibility and safety, I have no ambivalence whatsoever. But I do believe that I and others like me need to wrestle with some of my brother and sister Christians who may have a different view, who do not wish me ill, and I don't wish them ill, but churches need to help us find the conversation and have it, and not try to keep it outside the door because it's too political. And this is where I hope people, like those of you who are leading this Zoom meeting, and those of you who are here with us, can really take this away and think, how can we help one another hear each other to speech about tough issues, guns? I don't know why voting rights is such a tough issue. It seems to me parishes could and should be very public, and parish leaders should be very public. Christians should be very outspoken in the public square about voting rights. This is not partisan. This is something that all Americans should be out there on the street saying we have to have voting rights for all. Congress, listen to us, do it. But the more contentious issues where there is a lot of room for discussion about how to actually embody goodness, we need to talk to each other, and churches should not run away from this. They have to help us do this. So, for example, I would ask, and I do ask at the end of the chapter on misogyny, how will our churches help create common ground in which our various beliefs and perspectives on abortion and all matters of women's reproductive health can be taken seriously? And what will our congregation say about this beyond the walls of our church? That's just one example. There are questions like that at the end of all the action chapters.
So, Kurt, I was going to ask you about this this challenge, which I think you described so well in the book, that you not only take on the Christian right, I think you also press those of us who are liberal white Christians. You push us to take stock of why we have been so silent and timid in the face of injustice. That too often we like to call for dialogue, but we're uneasy if we're being asked to really do anything disruptive of the status quo. So I was going to ask you about how we get over that, but I'm not going to actually do that because you've already been speaking to that. Let me ask a related question, though. I think I've noticed that for white Christian nationalists, many of us who are liberals, feminists, LGBTQ folks, Black and brown folks, Jews and Muslims, and Democrats even, are seen as enemy, not just to be voted in opposition to, but to no longer have standing, to be destroyed, as dangerous, as enemies of America and of God. So given that enemy making that we're witnessing, how do we avoid acting similarly in terms of naming Trumpers as evil and hateful and beyond redemption? So how should we be responding to white Christian nationalists, to Trump enthusiasts? Is there anything or nothing we can do? What's your sense?
This again is where I think congregations have such a huge role to play, because I think we're trustworthy when we take stands and are honest and clear about what we actually believe. And if we can say, this is where we are, and we invite you to dialogue with us or to disagree, and we'll try to respect what you say, we won't allow ourselves or others to be dehumanized or violated, but we want to grant you that same respect. We don't want to violate you or dehumanize you, even though we may fiercely disagree with you. But this is what our churches, as well as our synagogues and our other spiritual communities, need to be saying somehow in the public realm, is let's talk about this together. Let's not kill each other off. Let's not trivialize and demean one another. It also helps us, Marvin, if we recognize how much of those of our opposition, people who really hate us, how much of their lives are rooted in fear of who we are. I mean, here you and I are, a gay man and a lesbian. That in itself is a source of great fear to people. Sort of at every turn, people are afraid, and we ourselves are afraid. I mean, I'm afraid of going out and being shot because people don't like what I'm saying. I can't let that stop me from going out and trying to do what I believe is the right thing. But I don't believe that I am called by God or anybody else to go out and treat people the way I don't want to be treated. I believe I'm called to try to love my enemy. But love my enemy does not mean lying to them. It doesn't mean telling them what they want to hear. It doesn't mean not calling them to account if they're hurting me or others, you or others. So it's taking a stand and also trying to convey that we are open to people who disagree with us, and we will try to respect them, and to somehow build the platforms for that. And again, this book tries to do that. And the third part tries to say, okay, you don't have to agree with this, but let's talk about it. Let's not dehumanize each other.
So I think this leads to a question much on my mind, and I would imagine others, and that's to talk together for a bit about both hope and despair.
Mhm.
Because I think the forces of rising fascism are very well organized, very well funded, and deadly serious about turning the US into a fundamentalist Christian theocracy.
Right,
So for them, January 6th was only the beginning.
right.
Some have said it was a dress rehearsal.
Mhm.
So in the midst of this cultural crisis, what gives you hope? Or as you put in the title of another of your books, what does it mean to keep your courage in such challenging times?
Bishop Robert DeWitt is one of the bishops who ordained the Philadelphia 11. And he used to sign his letters to those of us women he had ordained, keep your courage. And here's what I believe he meant by that. Courage is not an absence of fear, but it's that journey through fear that you can only make with your sisters and brothers and siblings. Somehow knowing that when somehow we travel together, and not just with each other here, that not just, for example, Marvin, you and me and our friends and colleagues and spouses and whatever, but with our ancestors, something our Native American friends know well, but the presence of those who've gone before go with us now, stuff like that. So we go with people and we move through fear. We do not deny it. I just thought about this morning. 37 years ago, I went on an outward bound excursion to celebrate my 40th birthday with another woman who was turning 40. And part of the experience was a ropes course in which we had to leap across a wide chasm from one log to another, and all of this about 10 feet above the ground. This was up in the Penobscot Bay area, by the way, in Maine. Of course, I was petrified, and I mean that literally. I literally could not move until the young woman, and Bishop Brown, you will like this, I think, until the young woman who was the coach, who was standing there underneath me, said, "Carter, think of this as if some bishop were telling you no. Think of it as if think that some bishop is telling you you should not jump, that you cannot jump because you can never be a priest because women cannot be priests. That bishop is saying, don't you dare jump, Carter." So at that moment, I breathed deeply and I stepped back and I hurled myself forward and I landed on both feet on the other side of the chasm. We act because we are compelled to act, because we are empowered by coaches like that young woman and by Bishop DeWitt and by many others who've gone before us and who go with us to do what we really believe. That is what courage is. We step back, we breathe deeply, and then we act. I was terrified. Even as I went through the air, I was scared, but I did it. That's what we have to do together, we Christians who care about this, and we individuals who care about this. Understanding that others have been there too. That is a major wellspring of my hope, knowing that we can do it. Memories like that. We see that others have been in hard places and have found a way. When Trump was elected, a Black woman friend said to me and to a bunch of other white folks, "Welcome to my world. Welcome to my world." Sheila, that Black woman friend of mine, has not ever then or now given up, because her faith and her ancestors, and she would say her God and her Jesus, will not allow her to even imagine that she can give up or that she is ever alone. We walk and we talk and we sing and we dance together. We are never alone. Our hope is in this kind of belonging. Thich Nhat Hanh's concept, we belong, a Buddhist concept, we belong. Christian concept, we co-inhere. Buddhist concept, we are codependent arising together. We belong together forever. We are never alone. There are hundreds of you, sisters, brothers, siblings, friends, right now, here and there, here and now on this Zoom. We are together. None of us is ever alone, and therein is our hope. And how can we not then jump, speak up, find our voice, speak our voice in the faith that we can make things better and that we must make things better, and that is what we are put here by that great spirit of love to do while we have time on this earth. We are here to make it better for our kids and our nieces and our nephews and our neighbors. That's why we're here. We have to take that leap and jump. We don't have a choice if we are really trying to align ourselves rightly with the Jesus tradition.
You know, Carter,
Marvin, excuse me, 1 second. I just wanted to let people know the chat is open. If they have questions, they can post them there. And as you two continue your conversation, I'll be monitoring that.
I was just going to say, Carter, thank you, Jane. I don't often quote you and Augustine in the same breath. As you were speaking, I thought about Augustine, at least a quip that has been attributed to Augustine, saying, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to change them.
Yes.
So I think what I would say is so striking these days is the absence of anger in the face of so much injustice, and of course the need for ongoing courage. And so for your anger and your courage, I thank you, as well as for this marvelous book. So Jane, if you're ready, let's see what we have by way of questions from others.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. Although you guys technically have a few more minutes. If there was something more, Marvin, you needed to ask. I'm sure there's a million things. Go ahead. Yes, Carter, please do.
Can I just say one more thing? Because Marvin had said, just think about anything you'd like to say that I may not ask. And the one thing I have thought about it, I thought about it while I've been watching the U.S. and the Holocaust series on PBS, Ken Bird's and Lynn Novak's series. They've pointed out, and I had not thought about this until they pointed it out, that fascism in Germany moved so quickly. It didn't take long. You know, we think, well, this could take us years to get to this horrible point. Well, no. You know, we are already moving along the way towards something very, very dreadful unless we can push it back. And it took fascism only 2 or 3 years to really grab hold in Germany. And I think we shouldn't let ourselves forget how rapidly sin and evil can do their dangerous, deadly business. That is not a source of hope for me, but it is but we have to be really hopeful and realistically hopeful. We have to look at reality and realize that now is the time for us to speak up and not let this happen. And we can do it, but we have to do it together.
There's some great questions coming in. I'll start with one and then I'll continue to watch the chat as they do. For those of us here in Maine who still read the newspaper, like I do, a lot of us read in this past Sunday's Maine Sunday Telegram an op-ed that they ran that was actually from the Kansas City Star. And the headline was, U.S. Constitution is not based on the Bible. And they were refuting something that Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri had said. And they described him, by the way, as someone at the forefront of white Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. That apparently in a speech last week, he said, without the Bible, there is no America. And they feel that this is a dangerous message. And they say this sort of white Christian nationalism is taking over the Republican Party and endangering religious freedom for everyone. But then they said this, and Carter, I'd be really interested in hearing how you would make the distinction, because they dropped it in the last paragraph and then ended their piece. They said, faith has been an integral part of America's most important social movements. Martin Luther King Jr. was a minister, yet he and others used their faith as moral guideposts for the nation, not as a blueprint for autocracy. So could you talk about the difference between using faith the way white Christian nationalists do and the way other social movements like King's, for example, have?
Yeah. Like the spirit that we call by many names, I will call her God at this moment. Like God, faith is not necessarily a nasty word, a word signaling injustice and oppression. Faith, I hope, in my life and in the lives of the people who are in this Zoom room, has often been a motivator in terms of our working for justice in various forms, or our standing with people who need advocacy and so forth. I mean, faith is a powerful motivator. Without the Bible, there is no America. That's a very interesting statement. Without Josh Hawley is a very interesting man. I think when we confuse the Bible with a blueprint for autocracy, which is what Hawley is doing, and believe that somehow the Bible is about some authoritarian God and man taking charge and killing enemies and whatever. If that's the Bible that Josh Hawley is reading, that's not the Bible that I attach myself at all to through my life as a Christian. Desmond Tutu once said, when he was looking at those who held apartheid in place, he said, I sometimes wonder which Bible they're reading. It's not the Bible I'm reading. That's what I would say to Josh Hawley. Also, America, as this book suggests, is a very mixed bag in terms of goodness and evil. And some of the goodness has really come to us through people like Martin Luther King and others who have believed passionately in much of what the Bible teaches, and for that reason have struggled for justice and have died for justice. But the Bible has also given us some really pretty dreadful stuff in terms of some people teaching a God of vengeance, which to me is not really the God that Jesus loved. But certainly a case can be made for that God. If you look hard enough in the Bible, you'll find a God who lambasts his enemies. Well, no to that God, I would say. That is not the God we want. We want a God who has compassion and who struggles to embrace us all and to turn us around when we're wrong. So I would say faith can be a source of great goodness, just like faith can be distorted and turned into, I suppose, if Josh Hawley and others would call it faith, a root of a lot of evil.
A related question has come in. One of the audience members is wondering if there are particular scripture passages that feed your soul and your passion for justice and motivate you and help you have that courage and hope you've been talking about.
Actually, there are, and I have them listed on my desk over here because these days I like to go to the Bible and read one or the other. But Psalm 121, I'm actually preaching on this coming Sunday at Myers Park Baptist Church, partly because I live in the hills and it's easy to lift up my eyes. And that gives me great hope. The Beatitudes, of course, give us a picture of a God of great mercy and love and compassion and inclusivity. The great passage that Jesus himself quotes about liberating the oppressed and breaking open the prisons and quoting the prophet Isaiah is a wonderful passage. And passages from various prophets, wonderful, wonderful passages. Psalms, prophets, parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan, the parable of the rich young ruler. I talk about a good bit in this book. That's not always a parable that inspires me, but it's a parable that interests me and challenges me about the place of wealth and money and security in our lives.
Thank you. And that question, by the way, was from Tom Blackstone. in the audience. We had a message in the chat that folks would like to know who the questions are from. You can also open the chat box, audience members, and you'll see the questions as they come in. Carter, another question that interested me, and I'd be interested in hearing your answer, comes from Lynn Ellis in Brunswick. Could you elaborate on the connection of guns and white nationalism, and what can we do about that connection?
You know, when people have said, shouldn't there be more than 7 deadly sins? There easily could be more listed, and if there were, I would have made the sort of the idolatry of guns in American culture certainly a deadly sin, because it is. As it is, I pretty much subsume that in my chapters on violence, along with war, which is yet another one, a huge one that could easily be our war making. But violence, guns, that is such a contentious issue. When people talk about our Second Amendment, I want to scream, to be honest, personally, because first of all, I think the Supreme Court got it wrong in 2008, and again in 2010, when it has ruled most recently on gun rights. Prior to that, there was no notion at all that anybody had that every person had a constitutional right to have guns. It had been understood traditionally for hundreds of years that that amendment was a time-constrained amendment about early American militia, and it had to do with collective ownership of guns. It was not about individuals' rights to bear arms. Well, we could argue this, I'm sure, and many people do. So I don't know. I mean, who knows what is meant? I'm not an originalist, however, and I don't really care what was meant originally. What I care about right now is gun violence and the horrific incidents that we are seeing every day if we're paying attention, but certainly every month or two, in horrific displays of mass violence. The Uvalde, Texas, the Buffalo, New York, the Tree of Life, the rock concerts, the churches that have been attacked, other schools, Marjorie Stoneham Douglas School. There is no question in my mind that our churches should be espousing sane, reasonable gun laws. And again, that should be a place where churches bring together gun owners, people who own guns, who want to continue to own guns, who like their guns, who maybe even love their guns, with those of us who do not love guns or own guns or want guns, and who in any case want gun safety. And what we've seen here in our little mountain town is there are a lot of people who are gun owners who want gun safety as much as I do, and as I'm sure you do, people on this Zoom meeting, and some of you may be gun owners, and that's fine. The problem is not owning the guns, it's not having sane gun policies, it's not getting the AR-15s and other long guns off the streets. Nobody should be walking down the streets with those long guns, automatic guns, semi-automatic guns. I'm not even sure what they're all called, but guns that can kill masses of people in a couple of minutes. None of us should have access to those sorts of guns. And so those guns should be gotten off the street, and that should be done by law. It should be illegal to own those guns. Other guns, we should have some kind of regulation and some kind of control, much as we do cars and other kinds of weapons and dangerous instruments that we have access to. We should be accountable for them. All of us should be held accountable, and there should be laws. This should not simply be state by state. This should be national legislation. Now, as with abortion, states are having to do the best they can. And so with guns too, states are having to do the best they can, but there should be federal legislation about guns, and churches, in my opinion, should be advocates of that. But we should be advocating at bringing together gun owners and people who don't own guns to say this in a common voice. And we can, because most gun owners agree with most non-gun owners that we need sane gun legislation.
Thank you for that. And I know that Lynn, as an advocate for gun safety here in our state, would resonate with a lot of what you just said. The next question comes from Reverend Amanda Gerken-Nelson. And by the way, folks, I do realize you can't see what I thought you could see. It's because people are sending me the questions directly in a direct chat message, which means I'm the only one seeing them. So I'll be careful to acknowledge who's asking. Reverend Amanda Gerken-Nelson asks, what is the role of repentance and reparation in the church's response to white Christian nationalism?
Great question. Oh, it's a huge and central role for all of us. And again, I know I began to sound like a broken record, but it is the responsibilities of our congregations, our parishes, our religious leaders, ordained and lay, to bring this up and to make this central to our Christian education, to say, hey, we need to talk about this in some serious ways and join hands with others who are talking about it and see what we can do in the way of public repentance, public conversion, it's like the truth and reconciliation work that Bishop Tutu did and that has been done in other parts of the nation, whereby people really do get together and repent collectively and try to turn. That's where conversion happens. We turn around to go the other way. And part of that conversion would be reparations, to do what we can on behalf, concretely, monetarily, and in other ways too, perhaps on behalf of the peoples we have oppressed, we being white American Christians have oppressed historically. And let me just say that this is so often where people will say, yeah, but we haven't done it. You know, none of us are responsible for all of these terrible things that other people did in earlier times. It is true that none of us sitting here is personally responsible for any of this. But I like the image of the building that has collapsed and the rubble that is lying there. Consider that for a minute an image of America, of white supremacist America, of racist violence. We have all this rubble, and just because we didn't do it, we didn't build that building. We weren't the architects, we were not the engineers, but there we are. That does not keep us from going through the rubble. That does not keep us from trying to figure out how we're going to salvage anybody who may be in there. That does not keep us from trying to figure out how we don't do this again and just reconstruct a building that's going to collapse again. We have ethical, moral, spiritual responsibility now to go through the rubble that is our racist past and retrieve what we can and build something better. And that is specifically the responsibility of white American Christians. It should be right at the center of our worship and our education, how we do that. And I do talk about this actually in the book, there in the chapter of what to do about racism. There are lots of ideas, but one of them has to do with reparations. One of them has to do with voting rights as well, that we need specifically to work on voting rights and reparations for our African American siblings right now.
That is a great segue, Carter, to a question that Christopher Gilbert is asking. First, I've had somebody ask me if we could just say what the 7 deadly sins are. So I'll read them. The lust for omnipotence, entitlement, white supremacy, misogyny, capitalist spirituality, and domination of the earth and its creatures, and finally, violence. But back to the responsibility for repentance and reparations and Christopher's question. He writes, in my experience, white progressive Christians love our book studies. And often that is all we do. We read the book, talk about it, and think we are done or have all the answers. Given that many of us are going to be reading and discussing the book, what wisdom do you have to give our book groups hands and feet to act in the world?
Well, that is a fabulous question, probably the best question of the day. What do we actually do beyond writing a book and reading a book? Wow. That's what, this sounds like I'm passing the buck, and I suppose I am, except for I have my groups of friends and co-readers and people that I have to figure this out with too. Congregations and groups, spiritual communities need to figure this one out. You're absolutely right. We need to go beyond reading and coming up with sort of wise answers, because there's a lot of that to be had. And I think probably there's among us all, there's probably a great deal of wisdom, collective wisdom. But what do we do? I mean, we know there are a lot of tried and tested and sometimes effective and sometimes not so effective things of marching and going to the state capitals and going to Washington back before COVID. We can probably do that again pretty soon. Writing Congress people, calling Congress people. I mean, all these things, I'm afraid we do need to keep doing all those things. I think that, they may make us tired to think of it, but we have to do those things. But we also have to come up with solutions that maybe we haven't before about how to really get. I mean, one of the things I love about this particular Zoom group, and I've said this to everybody who's asked me about what to do with this book, is I said, look at what Maine has done. Thanks to Rob and Jane and Alan and Thomas and others of you. Look at all you people who've come together. That in itself is something. That is not nothing. It's not just a book study. It's not just a presentation by one person. It is a bunch of people together thinking about, okay, what in the world do we do now? Somehow together we could figure out some things to do. I know we can. I say we very loosely there because I'm not in Maine with you, but I know you can, just like I know we here in North Carolina can. And we could even link up with each other perhaps on certain issues, or we can use the churches that we happen to belong to or know people in and say, hey, we need to get together and do these things. This is not something that St. Philip's can do by itself, or that St. Brendan's can do by itself, or that First Congregational Church can do by itself. We've got to somehow come together and go together to see Congresswoman or Congressman so-and-so, and push and push and push and be like the nagging widow. Just don't give up. Just do not accept no for an answer when it comes to these matters of justice. And then there's some, we haven't talked about this, and this is in a way secondary to not letting our country go down the tubes. But in the longer haul, we Christians need to look at what's going on inside our churches too, in terms of liturgies and images and language, and how we move forward from one generation to the next with our basic assumptions of who God is and how we image God and the Spirit and Jesus. So that I put a little bit on this behind right now. We are needing to vote and are needing to save this country from going down a fascist tube.
That's actually related to a question that's come in about, our own dirty laundry in the church. Ian Lynch writes this: Gerhard Muller has published a book applying the title, quote, Son of Man to Trump, calling him a type of Messiah in addition to Jesus. It's being distributed at rallies, and is it time to call out at least some of his followers as members of a cult? And is there any value in doing that? I think there is a question about when is it time for some Christians to say to those white Christian nationalists, you're not Christian?
Well, I don't even say, we can say that, I suppose, but I don't even need to think we have to say that to them so much as we need to be public in modeling what we believe being Christian is. Let me give you an example. We have a lieutenant governor in this state who is a pretty reprehensible character when it comes to his values and his moral standing, particularly in relationship to LGBTQ people, but pretty much on everything. His name is Mark Robinson. He is a minister and he's the lieutenant governor, and he's African American. And he came to a rally here about a month ago and spoke against, he spoke in a Christian church with all of our Republican legislators, local legislators on the podium with him. And he spoke against families, any other families than traditional heterosexual families. And he called LGBT people, especially trans people, terrible names. I mean, just ugly, ugly names. Now, none of us that I know knew about that before it happened, or we might have gone to protest, but I'm not sure we would have, partly because most people might have been just too afraid to go because of the violence and the guns and whatever, which are everywhere, certainly in the South, but pretty much around the nation now. But I don't know whether we had known or not what we would have done, but finding out about it, we thought, well, now we're going to have our own rally. That was a faith and family rally. We are having our own faith and families rally in about 2 weeks here, where we are having, of course, trans and LGBT, all kinds of families, and we're having Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews and Christians and pagans and others all on a stand together. We're having music and we're having food and we're having lots of games for children, and we're going to get lots of press and lots of attention, and we're going to make it known that this idea came to us through Anchor Baptist Church, which had this other image of what it means to have faith and what it means to be family. And that's probably all we need to say about that. If you hear what I'm saying, it's like saying, okay, you can talk all you want to about trans people like us, but here's what we have to say. And we don't even need to say anything about them other than that's what you said. And this is what we're saying. This is who we are. And I hope that winds up being a strong, happy, good families and faiths rally.
What a great model. I love that model. And I love the questions that have come into the chat. They are so good.
They are.
I have saved the chat, and we at the main council, who will be coordinating next steps, including the book groups, will collate those into a resource so that everyone can see and use those questions in the days ahead as they read and talk about this important book. And I just hate to stop this, but I must. We want to respect people's time, including yours. So Carter and Marvin, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today, and for inspiring us to take action, calling out white Christian nationalism for what it is and what it's doing to our country and to our world, and then committing ourselves to generating what you call justice love. I love that. Whoever and wherever we are. Thank you. And thanks to all of you in the audience today, not only for being here, but also for your extraordinary generosity. And I think Alan has a big announcement about that.
I do. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Carter. Thank you, Marvin. I am so pleased to share that as of just a few moments ago, we have received gifts totaling $2,695. All of which we will send to support the work of Faithful America as they challenge Christian nationalism and white supremacy, and to support their work to renew the church's prophetic role in building a more free and just society. So thank you to the 101, I think it was, of you who made donations when you registered. If you have been inspired by this event and you did not get a chance to make a donation when you registered, there's still time. So you'll find a link in the chat box where you can go to make a secure donation today to help us cross the threshold to $3,000. That would be a nice round number to send to Faithful America. Thank you all.
That is so exciting. That's just amazing. And as we've heard today, Carter's book is a call to action. And I would say that making those donations, it's fair to say 101 of you have already taken action. So thank you for that. And another action we can all take today, if you haven't already, is to go online and sign the statement, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, if you happen to be part of the Christian tradition. And one of the great questions in the chat, by the way, was how to take this work and use it in non-Christian settings. So I recognize that not everyone here on the call today affiliates with the Christian tradition, but for those who do, go online. Nicole is dropping the link in the chat for you to sign that statement. There are already 6 pages of signers from Maine. If you go on the website, there's a list of everyone in the nation who's signed. I will warn you, we were talking about this before the meeting started, they're very slow to update the list. So both Alan and I have signed the list and they haven't updated with our names on it yet, but go ahead and sign on, and maybe if they get flooded with lots of signatures from Maine, they'll go ahead and update the online list. And that chat in the chat is the link if you'd like to do that. And then another action you could consider doing in the near future, maybe not right today, in fact, you can't do it yet today, is reading Carter's book and discussing it with a group. Now, this slide explains how this optional follow-up activity is going to work, but you'll also get all this information in a follow-up email. So don't feel like you have to write this all down or remember it. You'll get it all in an email very soon. And that email will also include a link for you to sign up for a book group or to sign up a book group that already exists. So we're asking groups of 4 or more people to read the book in its entirety, meet at least once, although you could meet lots of times, either in person or online, and discuss it. And then if you've registered with us by the deadline, which is October 5th, to register, not to have read the book, you'll be given the opportunity to meet with Carter online again on February 8th to talk about your group experience, the questions that were raised for you, the thoughts that you had about it. We do ask that each of these groups appoint someone to be a contact person for us, and we'll deal with them, and then they'll distribute important information as you go along. So be looking for that email from mcc-events@maincouncilofchurches.org. It'll have all the instructions. And it doesn't matter whether you're already in a book group who's going to read the book, or maybe your adult ed group at your church wants to read the book. Or if you're someone in the audience tonight who wants to just connect with other people in the audience who'd like to form an online group, we'll help you do that. And the form you'll fill out will guide you through identifying who you are and what you'd like to do. We do encourage people to use your local booksellers when you do buy your copy of the book for this. If it's at all possible, please support your local booksellers. So we hope you'll join us in that next step. And forgive us, we couldn't resist the opportunity with all of these folks to give a commercial. And the first commercial is for an upcoming event with the Maine Council of Churches, Beyond the Rainbow Flag, Walking the Walk of Radical Inclusion. This is an event in honor of LGBTQ+ History Month, which is October. And we are so excited to welcome Brandon Robertson to Maine. He's known as the TikTok preacher, and Rolling Stone magazine named him one of the top 40 hot list of creatives and influencers and thinkers in America today. He's a prolific author. I'm old enough to be his grandmother, which just makes me so sad, but really great guy. And he happens to be friends with our own Marfine Chan, who so many of you here in Maine already know. And Marfine got him to say he'd come to Maine, and St. Ansgar Lutheran Church has offered to host this exciting event, and we at the Maine Council are proud to be one of many co-sponsors. The tickets will go on sale September 23rd, which is Friday. So watch our Facebook feed and our website, and tickets range from free, so anyone can come, up to $50. And that will open on Friday. So we hope you'll come. And Alan, I think you have a commercial for the BTS Center.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. That's really exciting. And I'm so glad to invite you to join the BTS Center for our upcoming convocation, being held online in just 2 weeks, Thursday and Friday, October 6th and 7th. It's a Thursday afternoon and evening, and then all day on Friday. This is an event that has been held annually since 1905. So it's 117 years in the making. We're really excited about the lineup of speakers and presenters this year. We'll have New York Times bestselling author Cole Arthur Riley, who's written this phenomenal book called This Here Flesh, liberation theologian Ched Myers, preaching professor Veronis Miles, environmental activist and author Rob Hopkins from the UK, and fearlessly creative musician Reggie Harris, among others, for 2 days of learning, respite, and community. So you can learn a lot more about Convocation at convocation2022.org, and that link is in your chat box now. This has been such a wonderful gathering, and it's time now to bring it to close. So before we do that, let me take a moment once again to thank our sponsors, our co-sponsors and co-partners really in bringing this event to you. The Episcopal Diocese of Maine, First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ, South Portland, Maine, the Haney Layton Fund, the Social Action Committee of the Maine Conference, United Church of Christ, St. Luke's Cathedral in Portland, Maine, St. Albans Episcopal Church in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, the main conference of the New England Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and Hope Gateway in Portland, Maine. A couple of others thank yous. Thank you to Bishop Brown for being with us today. Thank you to our own moderator, Marvin Ellison, and especially our deepest gratitude to Reverend Dr. Carter Heyward for writing this book, for challenging us with the truth, and for calling us to action today. And thanks to each one of you for joining us. We're so glad that you've been with us. Go in peace.